Hey there, how's it going, my friends? My name's Carpo. Today I'd like to talk about the kids. Straight and to the point. Now I have three kids of my own. One who's a man now, he's 26. And then I have an 8-year-old and an 11-year-old. And raising kids in any day and age is difficult. And there are going to be trying times. But more recently, with the pandemic, a lot more kids have been cooped up, remote learning, and for some, it works, especially those who have friends around or other family members, brothers and sisters, siblings within their age range. Fortunately, my two youngest are 3 years apart. They can still somewhat get along and play and have fun. My brother and I were 3 years apart as well, so I understand. Now, the reason I'm making this is just because, there's a couple reasons. I wanted to make one a few months back, reading an article to you that I found from the Oregonian. It was like a letters to the editor. And I'm going to read that in a moment. And I also found a little page I'd written months ago of some notes. And during this time, I have so much empathy for kids in general. There's part of me that says, hey, they have it the roughest, and then part of me that says they're also the toughest. Kids can be molded, they can, suffer depression, anxiety, anything else, just like adults. However, it's easier for them to twist and change their idea of what's true and what's not, their ideas of what works and what doesn't, and they're much more adjustable to change. And sometimes, unfortunately, parents use that as a justification to treat their kids like shit. Now, I'm going to start off by reading that article I was telling you. I'm going to pull it out of my trusty cell phone holder here. I just made this out of leather. I've been doing leather working for the last couple days. My wife bought me some scrap leather, so I'm pretty proud of my work. And I just hang it here on my GoPro harness. But this was written by a kid named Max. And it's been a few months since I read it. I just found it on my notes here. So it says, he wrote a letter and sent it to the Oregonian's letters to the editor and then to the mayor, and multiple media outlets shared it. It says, in part, my name is Max, and I am 7 years old, and I'm in first grade. I think that there is a way to do socially distanced trick-or-treating. My grandma lives in Denver, and they're having socially distanced trick-or-treating. It makes me angry that my state didn't even think about it. Sheila, his mom, says Max understands the gravity of the situation and says he's always thinking about the big picture and how his actions affect others. He's really interested in fairness and those kinds of things, she says. Max says the pandemic has already made it hard on him, writing, like not going to school and not seeing my friends and not wearing a mask. I think this would be good for other kids too. This would make kids feel happy again. If we don't do trick-or-treating, I think this year we really need Halloween decorations. And this is the part that got me. I've noticed that people aren't decorating as much. It's like they've forgotten all about Halloween. At least a few ghosts in the trees would make me smile. Max ended his letter with these 3 words. Please remember Halloween. And the reason this got me was because Halloween is such an important time for kids. They love it, For parents, it might be something they'd be willing to let go because of all the chaos that was going on, all the problems that we had been having. And, I think that the children, as strong as they are, as tough as they are, they have feelings. They have their own inner world that sometimes parents ignore. And our expectations of kids, I think, sometimes, is way too high. Now, folks may point to other countries like, say, Japan and places where it seems that kids are pressured. But I'll tell you this, that when people say, actually, they say the same thing about the Japanese working harder than Americans, the truth is that Americans work actually more hours than the Japanese. And we tend to kind of brush it off as just working hard is what life's all about. So I just wanted to mention a few of the things that bother me, especially number one would be shaming kids. I think that is totally unacceptable. It's one of the things that I'm not saying that they shouldn't be ashamed if they do something wrong, but a lot of parents use shame as a technique to, make their kids feel crappy. And the idea is to explain to them what's going on. Kids are smarter than we give them credit for. But so also as a family, creating new experiences and doing things, that can be really hard. Over the last year, it's been difficult during the pandemic, and people haven't been able to go out and do the things that they want to do. And that's changing, and my youngest is going back to school next Tuesday. I live in Washington State, and so we're going into phase 2 and opening up schools at the request of the people. Because, well, pretty obvious reasons. You can only go on so long like this. And so they had their chance to, test and curb the pandemic, and they didn't do it. We all did what we were supposed to do. So we need to get our system back going, get our economy going again. But during this time, there's been a lot of stress on parents. Adults have had a lot of anxiety because of this. A lot of parents have just kind of like pushed off education, pushed off certain things that, the difficult parts of raising a kid, of being a parent. I know for a fact I've done my best, but it's hard because when you're stuck at home with everyone all the time, eventually you just grow numb to it. You just come to see it as the way that things always are, and you need your time away. But also, learning remotely is really difficult on the kids, and they haven't even met their teachers in person, And so the parents have to do our best, but realize that, especially that grades are not success. Your child's future and happiness is not contingent upon what his grades are. He or she goes to college or is or isn't what you want to be. There's nothing more frustrating than those parents who live vicariously through their children and push their children to be better, 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 because perhaps they themselves feel like they wish they were better, or perhaps they think that they are better and they want their kids to reflect that. I'm not sure of the reasoning why some people push their children to do such wild things, but there are certain ages, and we know this, with kids, that they're building neural connections. And you have to get down to the bottom of the discussion about which ages are best to learn certain things, whether it be math skills or reading or social skills. There are certain missed windows that if we don't hit them, then the kids become who they are anyway, so they're just going to adjust that into their way of being. So say they hate math or they hate reading. And I think that math and reading are two things that kids really do need in this world. If nothing else, I say learn history, but learn history outside of school, right? Because the real history you're never going to learn in textbooks. We know this. But basic math skills and reading skills and writing skills are the most essential things that we can give our children. And I'm really fortunate that my kids know how to read and write, and a lot of people don't. And that makes it much harder for them. But on a few other notes, a lot of parents in the 21st century have been medicating their children, giving them Ritalin, things like that. And I know people, I've had friends all through my years who said that they took Ritalin when they were young. And perhaps some kids are hyperactive. My God, my kids are jumping off the couch at 11 o'clock p.m. sometimes, and not sometimes, more often than I'd like to admit. But I realize that they have more, there's reasons for it, obviously. They get overactive in the evening before bedtime. A lot of parents like to blame sugar, things like that. But then we find out that true science says that actually sugar does not in any way, shape, or form cause hyperactivity. That it's a complete illusion. Perhaps the kids are at a party and they have cake. Or perhaps you have put it as a parent into the kid's mind that if he eats sugar, he will be hyper. Maybe that's another key and something to consider. Kids are very suggestible. So, a lot of folks want to have their kids in sports all the time. They want to make sure their kids are always busy, busy, busy. But just remember, thinking is just as important. Allowing your kid to just have time to sit and draw and be. And, I was the kid that, I would say nurture your kid's talent, whatever it is. And it may be difficult because parents don't always agree with what their kids do. But, like one of my kids loves to play games, but a lot of people do. Uh, Everybody's got their dreams. Everybody's got their own ideas of what they want, and they will discover on their own whether that works for them or not. But, when I was a kid, I was a pretty good kid as far as I know, when I was really young. But as I got older, and I remember this especially from the age of 10 on up through my teen years, I was always considered trouble by the neighbor kids' parents. It was always, I'm the one who's the troublemaker. And this is an important note because I really wasn't. I was usually following these other kids who were actually considered the good kids, and the ones whose parents usually had more money than my parents, the ones who would complain about me being a bad influence because of maybe the way I looked, talked, acted. I did have a foul mouth. I learned cuss words very young, and I used them very, very often. I definitely understood some of the darker parts of, humanity and things that a kid should just not know because of some of the books I read, joke books, things like that. One of the first books I found in my parents' closet. It was, or in their on their bookshelf, not closet. It was called Outrageously Offensive Jokes, and it was basically a racist joke book. It went through and it had everything was categorized into different racial jokes, ethnic jokes, and those were the first jokes I learned. I didn't even know I didn't even know what a Pole was, a Polish guy was. Like, I didn't even understand the Polish jokes. Like, what is a Polish guy? Like, why? Who are these people? But, the point being that as a kid, I had some weird foul shit I probably said. The thing is, I was just a really good kid, and I didn't really cause any problems. It was always these guys I hung out with who, one of my friends derailed a train once. They disconnected it, and it went cruising down. And we'd always joked about this, but he ended up not being able to hang out with his friends because of that. But he was the one that did it. Pulled the air brakes on all the trains, decoupled a whole load of these bark chips, or, wood chips. I don't remember how many cars, at least 5 or 6. They all rolled down the tracks because it was on a slope, and you knew that. And they went down and they tipped, got going too fast, and just tipped down this hill. It was a nightmare because it was on like a really steep hillside with rocks. And they had to call in cranes and all this different heavy equipment, and I think even a helicopter to get that thing upright. It was pretty wild. But the whole thing had fallen all the way down the hill. It was just a weird time. Anyway, point being that most of the horrible things that happened, I didn't cause. The worst thing I did was cutting down a tree, and I felt guilty about it. I guess I just wanted to see it fall. But anyway, that's about all I've got here. Just nurture the talent of your kids. Don't assume that because your kid hangs out with a certain other kid that kid's a bad influence, when sometimes we can't see the forest for the trees, or maybe we can't see the plank in our own eye is a better example. When we see that we don't want to admit that our own kids can cause problems. And it's okay to be firm. It's okay to be strong with your kids. It's okay to be straightforward with them. I definitely would urge it. But, if there's any one thing that I've learned in all these years about raising kids, and that's after raising a kid who's 26 now, and he's a great man. In my opinion, I'm a biased parent, right? But I've learned that pointing the finger and screaming at your kids, there's times where you can't help it, but putting your kids down or threatening them or punishing them seldom gets the same results as just letting them know that you're disappointed. And disappointment can go a really long way towards raising kids. And the only difference is that it takes time for that to work. It takes a long time for that to really set in. So anyway, I hope this helps somebody who's a parent out there. If you have young kids, you have a ways to go, and you'll see what I mean about they hit a certain age where you think there's terrible twos, right? No, then you're like, well, no, God, they're 3, and it's even worse. Then you're like, it's 4, it's even worse. But there's moments of clarity as they get older. You don't have to change their diapers anymore. But they're generally happy most of the time. But when a kid gets grumpy, when a kid gets upset, that that's when you've got to test your patience, and that's when I definitely test mine. And you learn how to cope differently, you know. Is it worth it? Yeah, it is. I mean, I feel it's not like a shallow, like I'm fulfilling my duty as a human being to reproduce. It's more like if you feel like you can provide a good life for your children and raise children, then do so. Some people do, some people don't. I don't buy into the antinatalism or the idea that having kids is inherently wrong or bad. Every generation seems to think something bad's going to happen and maybe we shouldn't have kids because they might suffer worse than we did. The thing is, there's also the potential for a utopia. And if we raise an intelligent generation that is aware of themselves, self-aware, and aware of those around them, I think we can do a hell of a lot better. So, thanks for listening, and I'm going to go see what the kids are doing.